What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. As always, I'm AJ Malillo, and I'm joined with my great co-host,
Stephen Rombolo.
And as you can see on the screen, there's another wonderful guy with us here. His name is Louis Biondolillo, as we like to call him, Loop-de Louis Biondolillo. So Louis and Stephen and I go way back to the college days, and now he has started an awesome job producing in local news, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the importance of local news, why local news organizations still matter, and when people can't trust the big name mainstream media, a great alternative, a great place to turn to is their local news sources. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're super excited to have Louis on. What's going on, man?
It's really good to be here, first and foremost, not only just to talk to you guys because I missed this, but also this is such an important topic. So it'll be really good to talk about this.
Yeah. So, Louis, before we get into the nitty-gritty about the importance of local news, let's talk a little bit about your background, where you're from, how you got to where you're going, or where you are, and then where you eventually want to be going is a better way to put that. So talk a little bit about yourself and your background, Louis.
Sure. So I went to Montclair State with both of you. I graduated just a little bit later. I'm a little bit younger. So I just graduated this May with a major in television and digital media, minor in political science. So we all had those connections together. Originally, I definitely wanted to be a reporter and an anchor, but I recently found out through my internship with my company before I got the job that I really enjoyed producing and the whole different side of things. So it's a little bit of a flip of a coin, depends on the day which one I really want to do, but for now the producing gig is going well.
So what does a local news producer do? What's the day in the life of Louis Biondolillo? Obviously, it starts at like 2:00 in the morning. But
well, it depends on the day, but today I did wake up at 2:00 in the morning, got in by 3:30, and I produce news for both New Jersey and Connecticut. So I have to really know my communities, and that's the first thing that I have to do. I have to know what they care about, what's important to them, and then I have to find the news. Right. So that's step one, finding what's going on today, what happened overnight since we didn't have a show overnight, what happened even yesterday that maybe we didn't cover, and what's happening in the future. So I have to find the news. In short, after that, I have to write the news. I have to make the news look good. And everything you can think of in a newscast is pretty much run by the producer. We're like the puppeteer that everyone else is really working to make the vision of the producer a reality.
Yeah. So you're the head honcho on the project, basically.
Yeah, if something goes wrong, it's my fault. If something goes right, it's the reporter's. It's a good thing on the reporter.
That's fair. That's fair.
A thankless job.
A thankless job, but important nonetheless. Exactly. But so, Louis, you are. Let's say you go in, and there's a couple stories to choose from. Let's say there was a fire overnight. There's a hurricane coming, and I don't know, something good happened, like the local diner served its 1,000th cup of coffee or something. How do you choose which stories lead the news?
So usually you lead the news with the most important thing. What's affecting most of your viewers, your listeners, depending on what media you're doing. In this case, we'll stick with TV. So in that example, you have right. 3 blocks that are separated by different commercials. I would put that hurricane story in the A block. If a hurricane is really coming and we're sure about it, definitely the A block. If we're not so sure, maybe the bottom of the A block, towards the bottom of it. Sure. You have the diner, the really cool, cute story where you have all the nice community members coming together. That'll be your C block story. That's your kicker, something to leave the viewers off with a positive view of the day. And what was the third story?
The fire. There was a big fire.
I think that would also be in the A block. Because that does affect people. It's important, but I definitely say that the hurricane affects the majority of the people and therefore should be the first thing. When I click into the channel, I see, wow, there's a hurricane coming. What do I need to know? How do I prepare? What comes next?
Right. So basically it goes by kind of like the utilitarian object of whatever affects the most amount of people, whatever the most amount of good for the most amount of people, right, would be that in philosophy. But in the philosophy of news, it's what is the thing that is going to affect the most amount of my viewers, right?
Yeah, and it works both ways. If you want to look at it in a positive light, there's that. But then there's some people that say, well, I'm going to be a little bit cynical right now. And really, the reason that news happens, it's a business. So
Right.
you want to keep as many viewers as possible. That's most companies' viewpoints.
Right.
My
Keep the
job is to
eyeballs.
my job is to bridge the gap of both, make it
Right.
interesting to watch and inform the public.
I have to mention this because I think that it comes up in almost every show that Steve and I do. Bridging the gap is the title of the show, and we often bridge the gap here on the show. Everybody, that phrase is used a lot. That phrase is used a lot. I love it. Thank you, Louis, for throwing that in there.
Yeah, I did that on purpose.
I'm sure. So, Steve, let's kick it to you. What do you got going on?
Yeah. So I'm curious because you mentioned with the hurricane, like you're going to put it in A block if you know it's true. Can you walk through sort of your verification process on these big news stories? Like, how can people trust that what you're giving them, or how can you trust that the information you're going to deliver is as accurate as possible?
Sure. So in a real functioning newsroom, there's something called the desk. You have your people at the desk. They're the ones that are making the phone calls, that are making sure all of your information is true. If I'm short on any information, calling them, hey, I need more info on this. We don't know if this is true. We don't know. There's not much to report on. If I know there's a car accident, for example, okay, did anybody get hurt? Did anybody die? Did it close down the roads? Sure, there was a car accident, but me saying there was a car accident on the Garden State Parkway is much different than the Garden State Parkway was shut down for 3 hours after someone died in an accident on the parkway.
Right.
So we have to verify it through the desk. The idea, the hope is to always get 2 points of verification. And going with the bridging the gap theme, usually in like politics stories, you get one side and you get the other. Those are more opinion things. That's up to the people that you're talking to. But if we're reporting a story, we want to make sure that an official saw it, an official reported it, and we also want to get the view of a community member. We want to make sure that it's not just the officials, because the officials, listen, we just saw in Texas, for example, the officials may not say everything that's true.
Right. Because what people have to remember is people have a public image that they have to keep up. So they might be hiding some information or withholding information that might help the story from a news perspective, but hurt the look of the person that they're trying to do the story about. So
I will say, going back to our hurricane example, the one thing that I don't need a double verification on is weather events. And the reason I say that, I just talked to my good old meteorologist. Most newsrooms have really great meteorologists. Sure, people will say, they get it wrong sometimes. They're projecting based off of models. And that meteorologist is going to check himself or herself, their own different models, more than one of them. So that's how that works as well.
Right. So you are in the newsroom, and what happens if something breaks, something big breaks? How do you cover that? So, the Prime Minister of Japan recently was assassinated. Let's say you're producing a show. What goes on in the newsroom?
First, you hear probably a shout from the desk. You probably hear something from the desk saying, hey, breaking news, you just all got an email. Check your email, all the information's in there. You either get that, but like for an international story, such a big thing like that example, I was there in the newsroom that day. Most people found out already on Twitter. So we found out on Twitter, and then we had the desk person do their magic, make sure that it was true. But we start working on it before that happens. There's no time to waste in this. You need to know, you need to get this right on the air as soon as humanly possible, because again, that goes back to your business, that you always want to be the first person, the first organization to get something out. It's beneficial to the company because they make money, and it's beneficial to the people because they get their information really, really fast.
Absolutely.
So I think an interesting thing about local news that I want to talk about is, you mentioned it before, community. So what do you if you had to, play like a definition game almost, if you had to identify your role in the community, what would it be? Do you see yourself as an information gatherer? Do you see yourself as a truth teller? Like, how would you describe your position to a community member?
I would probably say that I present the information. I'm not the face you see. We have our anchors and our reporters are the face you see, but the words that they're saying are mostly coming from your producer. The information comes from the desk. The words that they're saying comes from the producer. How they say it, how they show it is on the producer. But how they physically say it and do things, that's on the person that you see it, the anchor or the reporter.
So then to kind of piggyback off that, what do you see as being the best way as a producer? So you're not the guy that's in front of the camera. You're not sitting there, doing the newscast yourself. What's the best way for you to engage the community? Do you like to use, like certain buzzwords that are really going to resonate with, your region? Or because I think it's an interesting thing. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz. Like you're kind of sitting behind this cloak.
Do not pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, like everybody knows that you're there and they want to engage with you. How do you kind of put your own touch on that as a producer?
So what's funny is most people don't know that we exist. That's a real thing. Most people do believe that the reporters and the anchors are doing everything on their own. And don't get me wrong, reporters and anchors do a lot of work, first of all. But they don't have time to do everything. So that's the role of the producer, to make them look sound and say the correct things. I wouldn't say that I, as a producer, put my own flair on things. I say, as a producer, in the way that my newsroom works, there's other newsrooms that producers definitely have their own flair. But in my newsroom, the producer caters towards the people that are on the screen. So, Steven, say you were on camera. I know that the way that you're going to talk is much different than the way that AJ is going to talk. And I'm going to write differently so that you present that information in the best way possible. Because if I wrote the same thing for you as I did for AJ, people would be like, that's not Steven. That's not AJ. That doesn't work. So we present it from our anchor. The reason that we do it that way is because we are a 24-hour news cycle. So we keep going. We have a different anchor for different shows. I don't always produce AJ Malillo's show. I don't always produce Steven Rombolo's show. I produce the 12 o'clock news and whatever anchor is there. So I cater towards my anchor.
Yeah, so that must be pretty difficult, like having to find the anchor's voice and everything, I'm sure.
Only being at the station for a month so far, I would say that I've learned rather quickly. I've had to. There's actually a producer shortage in the industry right now. So I've been really pushed into the swing of things, making sure that I get it done quickly. But those first few weeks, it was a challenge.
So the anchor is almost like your medium of expression, then, is how I'm understanding it, right?
You could say that. You could say that. I think we reflect well on each other. There's a lot of times that the words that I write, like especially in the first few weeks, they'll go in before the show and say, hey, thanks for the information, but I wouldn't say it like that. So they'll change the way that I wrote it. I still have to approve it. I have to make sure that it looks good, it sounds good, and it's correct. And it all works. But I would say it's a collaborative team effort.
So can you walk through a little bit of the process then? I know that the three of us are familiar with our experiences on radio, but writing for news, because it's not like you're writing, like a current events paper in high school where it's like, oh, this happened today, this is my opinion on it. Can you walk through, like, let's say you get a story on your desk, from the minute it hits your desk to the minute it hits the air, how are you deciding what you're saying?
Sure. So the 5 W's, in my opinion, is the most important thing. Most specifically in your first sentence, first 2 sentences, you want the viewer or the listener to know who, what, when, and where. Those are the 4 that you can say in most of the time in the first sentence, sometimes the first and second sentence. Get them into the story, get them to know what it is. When I get a story on my desk, figuratively, most of it's on the computer, but when I get a story, it's usually written by either police, It's either written by them or it's a study from a scientist. It's some type of expert that we usually get this story from, if not a community member. But in those cases, you really have to take that information. I have to read that rather quickly and say, okay, how would I have liked it to be told to me? Or how would my mother or even my grandmother want to know this information? How would I say it to a friend, a parent, a community member, a family friend, whoever it is? I wouldn't say the study herein says that if you contract COVID-19 3 weeks ago, 2 days, it's very logistical, but you really want to make it conversational. That's pretty much it. You want to have it so that, like how we're having a conversation right now, none of this is scripted. You want it to come across as your best friend telling you what's going on.
Yeah, so that's a tightrope to cross, because obviously you want to present this information in the most professional way possible, but also in the most conversational way possible.
Right.
So what are certain phrases maybe that you want to stay away from? Like what would be an example? You're getting a story about the COVID science. Like, are you trying to use fear? Or are you trying to make it calming? Like how do you want that information to come across?
I think with urgency, but not using fear tactics. And a recent example of this, we've seen monkeypox cases go up across the nation, across the world, really. But right here in the state of New Jersey and even New York, cases have really gone up significantly from where we saw them 2 weeks ago. That's no reason to alarm the public, though, especially after we've been through a pandemic. It's not the end of the world as we know it. You could say that more likely that COVID was the end of the world as we know it, but you don't want to say it like that. Causing panic doesn't help anyone. All that does is make people nervous and I guess glued to the TV. So if you're a cynic, you could say maybe television stations want to do that. I know that's a big critic of national outlets. But a local outlet, that's not what we're doing. We want to take that story and say, how is it affecting you right here in Paterson, New Jersey, right here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, wherever that local station is? How is this national story going to directly affect you? For example, let's use a recent example. They're banning Juul pods right now. That's a big thing. Whether you agree or disagree, I don't care. Quite frankly. But when we told that story, we had to say, well, in this state, Juul pods were already banned. So it's not really going to affect you. Maybe we shouldn't put that much emphasis on that. Here in New Jersey, they weren't. So here in New Jersey, we could say, but other vape products are still available on the market, for example. How will it affect our viewers, our listeners? That's how I look at everything.
Right. So I guess that leads to like the big enchilada question of the interview, which would be, why should somebody turn on the local news over your CNN, your MSNBC, whatever, your big Fox News, your big, nationwide media conglomerate? Why should they go to their local news either first or over?
So don't get me wrong. I have nothing really against national news. National news serves its purpose in its own way, in its own form. I watch national news all the time. I'll watch MSNBC. I'll watch Fox. I'll watch CNN. I'll watch ABC. Any national outlet, I don't mind. But there's a big difference between what you see on MSNBC versus what you see on Pix 11 News, for example. It's huge. On the national outlets, you're not really getting a personalized look at the news. You're looking at, this happened on Capitol Hill today, and it's going to affect 500,000 Americans. Whereas in local news, right here in Montclair, 27 people died from COVID-19 today. Obviously, these are all fake numbers. But we really cater it to the people that are watching us. And that's what's so special about local news. You're not going to get that on the national budget. We may not have as flashy graphics or lights or equipment that you may notice that they have in national news. And that might be what you're looking for. But when you want to know what's happening in your community, no one does it better than local news. If you want to know what's going to happen in the next few days in your hometown, local news will probably have that for you much more than NBC will have it for you. Like, I even look at, go away from TV, if you've ever heard of The Patch, for example. The Patch has locations in many towns. There's a writer in each of the town. It's a one-person operation. They go around that town and they tell you the stories of that town. I read my local Patch pretty much every day. I can't say the same about local outlets, so maybe I'm a little biased when it comes to it, but local news to me is much more important in your daily life.
Well, I think, to equate it to what we were talking about before, how news at the end of the day is a business. You guys do generate revenue.
Sure.
I think the commodity that local news sells to its viewers is sort of an unwavering trust that what you're getting is something that is important to this localized community. Like, because it makes sense. You're dealing with, 3 or 4 anchors, your meteorologists. And I mean, whatever it may be, Pix 11, you're a regional thing. You're dealing with, so many people, whereas CNN, like you're saying, is the entirety of America, 300 million people. So when you boil that down, your local news, simply, I would argue, by virtue of them existing and broadcasting, is proof that they are delivering the news that is most important to, their little sliver of this region of the country. So I guess the question that I want to get at here is, it's obviously more sensational to hear the story about, to be contemporary about it, the January 6th hearings on Capitol Hill and, whatever it may be. What's the appeal? And I think we already asked this question, but I kind of want to dig into it a little more on the concept of trust. What's the appeal of turning on and hearing, whatever your local news has to say when the January 6th thing is a big deal? Like, how do you guys kind of level that balance between what is important for somebody to hear? Because I would argue that there are certain things that, like, you should go to CNN for, that your local news might not be best suited to tell you that story.
Sure. When it comes to Capitol Hill, local news doesn't have it as good as national news. Completely straight with you. But use the January 6th insurrection as an example. MSNBC reported all day. You got the live feeds of the January 6th insurrection. That same day, we found out one of the people there was from a New Jersey town, for example. Now I know that there's somebody in my community that feels this anger, this rage that the people that stormed the Capitol felt. And whether that makes me overjoyous or whether that makes me super angry, either way, I know that there's somebody in my town that feels the way that those people feel. I just think that local is so important in the fact that it caters to you and your environment. The national media outlets have a lot of stuff that we don't. There's a lot of stuff that local news, for example, subscribes to national outlets to get you those national news. If you're only watching one local news station, you'll probably get the headlines of national stories for the day, but we're not going to go in depth into it. We're not going to have 5 people sitting around a table debating on whether this policy is good for the American people. But you very well will hear voices from your own community about, all right, Steven was really happy about this, where AJ was really not happy about this, and here's why. They're in your community. This person is a farmer, and they're unhappy about this policy because it's going to make it more expensive for them to farm. But AJ is a consumer, so he likes that policy better. And so it really shows you how it affects your direct community more than the national outlets do. I can't think of the exact wording of it, but I would say national outlets are more of statistics and local news is more of your individual stories. So statistics versus stories, I think both are important in the grand scheme of things. But if I only had to pick one, it would definitely be the stories. I want to know what's happening near me. I want to know what's affecting my neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a great pitch to turn on the local news channel. How is this going to affect you, your neighbors, your loved ones, the people that are around you in day-to-day life?
Right.
The one thing that people just in general, they are more distrusting of the media today than they have been in a very long time. And
Yes.
you are the producer. You're the person that picks the stories, that writes the stories, like you've been saying. How do you, as the producer, attempt to fix that problem that people don't trust the media? They don't trust the news. How are you trying to make the news more trustworthy? And I would imagine, personally, speaking from experience of watching both local and national news seems to be the sensationalizing, the fighting for eyeballs. One side is going to give you a conservative perspective, the other side's going to give you a liberal perspective. Local news, from my experience, has always been some sort of attempting to cut down the middle of those things. And how do you as a producer do that?
Sure. So I know we're doing a good job when in the same day we get two phone calls, one calling us the liberal media and one calling us conservative skewed. That's my favorite kind of news day, because that means that we are telling both sides of the story, and some people don't like that, and that's fine. Local news is not a for everyone thing. I'm not saying everyone pick up your remote and turn on the local news. It may not be for you. If you're really skewed one far way or the other, maybe your CNN and your Fox is what you should be watching. I disagree. But if we get multiple calls from one side of the aisle saying, hey, you missed this part, this part's important to tell as well, then we messed up. And then we have to get back on the airwaves and fix that problem. We had, again, I've been working at the station for a month. Most days, I would say, we're pretty spot on. And we're not even saying my company name, so I can tell you if we weren't.
Right.
But I would say we're pretty spot on. There was one day that there was one piece of information wrong about a story. We didn't even have a show airing at that time. It was just repeating, because that's the way our format works. We got on the airwaves, fixed that story, and said on air in a previous version, we previously told you this. That wasn't true.
Right.
And we apologize to our viewers. It's going to happen sometimes. That happens on the major media outlets all the time as well. It's just you hear more about that because Twitter explodes.
Sure. And also, I mean, it happens in everyday life, right? Like, sometimes you mess up. Sometimes you hear something that's not true. But, what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And things like that happen sometimes. Our goal is to make sure it happens as few times as possible.
Sure.
And I would say that we're doing a pretty darn good job of that. And I would say that most local news outlets do a pretty darn good job of that. I would even say the national outlets do a pretty good job about that. I mean, exclude the bias. Opinions are opinions. You may not like them, but we don't report opinions unless it's our community members' opinions, and we don't say it. Our community does.
Right.
How, as a producer, how do you bounce back from something like issuing a correction, right? Because I know you personally, I know you take this role very seriously, and it's an important role, not only in the community, but in the public discourse of, general discussions about politics, law, culture, society. So when you have to issue a correction, how does the newsroom kind of handle that? What is the vibe there, so to say?
So I'm fortunate that I haven't made an editorial mistake quite yet. I'm sure it'll happen one day. I have made many cosmetic mistakes, but cosmetic is cosmetic. It's just the way the program looks. But I'll say from that day, that example of when the newsroom was like, hey, we messed this up, we have to go live. It was really, really quick. We had a meeting. We said, what did we mess up? How do we write this? How do we fix it? And we have to make sure that wherever this is posted, that it's corrected, whether that be not only on TV, but on websites, on socials, in articles that we write online. Everything has to be fixed, and we have to make sure that that's the case. If at that point we still mess up, I wouldn't blame anyone to turn off the channel and never watch a local news station again. Not any local news station, that local news station. But mistakes happen. As long as you fix them, you're honest, you're upfront about them, but you have to be upfront. It's not just being honest where you have a little citation at the bottom that says a previous iteration of this story. We physically have the anchor said, we previously reported this. That was wrong. We apologize. Here is the new information. So I think being upfront, it's the honesty portion. It's like any relationship. Steven, if you lied to me and you kind of just pretended that it didn't exist anymore, and I found out, I'd be mad at you. But if you were like, hey, man, totally messed up. I was wrong. 2 + 2 = 4, not 5. I apologize. I know how good you are at math, Steven.
I'm very bad at math.
But basically, we just have to be upfront with people. And I think it's the same as any relationship.
Yeah, I think looking at your local news as a relationship is such an important thing to look at. And all news, but particularly your local news, because it is affecting things that are going around you.
Well, here's the thing. It really is a relationship in more ways than one. One, the people at every news organization want the news to be correct. There's no one that goes into working in news that says, I want to mess up this story. I would say at least 99.5% of us. I'm sure there's someone out there that's a wacko. But it's also, like we've previously said, a business. If we make routine errors, people will not watch us. If people don't watch us, we don't get sponsorships, we don't get commercials, we don't get those, we don't get paid. So in addition to that, we lost trust with the community, we no longer have jobs. So we want to make sure that everything gets done, not only because we care, and first and foremost, do we care, but two, if the station goes down, we all go down with it. So it's not, nobody's trying to sabotage the media company that they have a contract in that they're working for.
Absolutely.
I think the important thing about this discussion, especially right now, is that even local news, and again, we are all people who have experience in, collecting news, broadcasting news, writing news. Until you're in that sphere, it's kind of hard to decipher. I could sit down and I could turn on the TV and I'm like, well, how did these people decide that this was important? Where did they get this information from? And I think the value of a conversation like this is you're giving the population that you're serving, I would say that you have a job of service to a community. You're giving them a peek behind the curtain and you're saying, listen, you guys trust us to give you this information. This is how we do it. This is our process. This is what we want. And it's very refreshing and it's very inspiring, I'll say, for the future of news, to know that there's people like you who genuinely care, that are writing these things, that are being thorough, double, triple checking the information, and you're not afraid to come out and say, hey, I messed up. I think that's the biggest thing is accountability in news, because we want accountability, obviously, from our elected officials and other people with service, but we also want our news people to be accountable, to give us the right information, the best information. And I think kind of pulling the veil back like this is a really great way to not only, reassure a community, but kind of reassure just the general population that these people are not the enemy, so to say.
We're everyday people, just like every other profession. We're in it for two things. One, for me at least, it's that service to the community, and two, everybody is in a job for every other reason, every reason that every other person's in a job. Right. And one of the reasons that you're doing this podcast, let's be honest, we're all doing our jobs for money. It all comes down to that as the bottom line. But first and foremost, for me at least, I like this industry. I want to tell stories that are important to the people. Something that we didn't touch on that I do think is quite important right now. Do we have time?
Sure.
Something I think is important. I mentioned a producer shortage before. If you were to look at local newsrooms, even 5 years ago, you would see a much older newsroom. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But many of these people, and when I say older, I'm talking not even old. I'm talking 40s, 50s, 60s. We're not talking senior citizens here, even though there are quite a few. Many of those middle-aged people between the 30 and 60 age, I'll say that's middle age, we'll just use that, have gone onward and upward to fulfill their next part of their dream because they've been able to move up in the past few years. There's so many people that worked for my company that are now working for NBC, that are now working for these national outlets. And there's so many people that wanted to stay in local news. So now you have those older people, those veterans that have been in this industry, and you have these fresh new minds that are coming out of college and working two weeks later. So you really do have a variety of people, of opinions, of views. When I sit at my newsroom meeting every day, I look around the room and I see people as young as me, and I see people as old as 70 years old. And I really think it's a great variety of people in terms of age, in terms of political affiliation, in terms of gender, in terms of race. Newsrooms are really, really diverse and in all ways, shapes, and forms. We're not just talking skin color. We're talking about their minds and how they feel as well. So I think it's really, really cool that we're seeing local newsrooms that are so diverse right now.
Yeah, I would say that's really refreshing too to hear is that it's not, especially in a local news. Obviously, you can't necessarily speak to what it's like at Fox or CNN or
Right.
MSNBC, but in local news, it's not like you're in this echo chamber of the same ideas because in my opinion, one of the most important parts of the diversity of news is that there are different thought processes, whether there's thought processes that are different based off of socioeconomics or race or politics or whatever else you put in there. That is important for news, right? You want to cater to a large amount of people and get people interested in regardless of their viewpoints on certain things because you want them obviously to get their information from you. So the best way to do that is to have that conglomeration of different ideas in one place.
I think too, even more so, any position of service to a community should be reflective of that community. I know very recently one of the bigger things was, talking about how this is the most diverse and representative Congress, body of representatives that we've ever had. There's more women, more people of color than there have ever been. And as a community member, right, whether it be the community that's watching, 611 to the community that's, being represented by the state of New Jersey in the House of Representatives, I want those people to look like and sound like and think like and be like the people that they're supposed to represent. And simple as that, it's refreshing to hear that a newsroom is doing the same thing. You want that diversity. You want the people who are giving you information to be reflective of the population that they're giving the information to.
Yeah, sorry, Louis, you could go.
The coolest thing about my newsroom specifically too, again, this part I can't speak for all local news, but it is very cool that even within the age groups, there's diversity. If you look at the older crowd, we have men, women, white people, black people, Asian people, all types of people, and the same thing for each age group. So even within the different age groups, you have such a diverse population that you get all different types of people. It's just so cool. I really do love going into work every day.
And that's what it's all about, is loving what you're doing and going into work. And it's refreshing to hear such an honest and optimistic take on the news industry, because you really rarely hear that in today's day and age. No matter what political aisle you're on, no matter where your stripes are, people distrust the media. And there are outlets. It's good to know that there are outlets that are trying to do the right thing. They're just trying to give the information and the most accurate information that they can. And it's up to you to come up with the opinions on your own. Right.
Yeah, so that's been my philosophy ever since I even started college. But just a little checklist for people. If you're trying to find a good news station, the first thing you want to know is your priorities. What are you looking to find? Are you looking for those stories, or are you looking for those statistics? That depends on local versus national. Are you looking for somebody to echo your own views, or are you looking for someone to tell you the facts and you come up with your own views based off of that? Are you looking for news or are you looking for entertainment? That's the different. That's a big thing. A lot of this distrust with media, in my personal opinion, comes from not even just the national media outlets because they're good. There's some good reporting going on at MSNBC. There's some good reporting going on at CNN. There's some good reporting going on at Fox News. Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow are not news. They are entertainment shows that talk about the news. The Five is not news. It's an entertainment show talking about the opinions of news. So if you want to talk about the media industry as a whole and whether they're trustworthy or not, make sure you're talking about news if you're talking about news. That is
Right.
my biggest pet peeve when it comes to the entire industry. Some people may say, well, they present like news and so they're news. Yeah, they do present like news. And I think that's a major problem. But like this whole conversation, as much as I'm glad that we're promoting local news, national news is good too. It's just a different thing. But make sure it's news. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Hold on. Let me grab the soapbox, put it down, throw it away.
No, Louis, I think that's an awesome point that you made, right? There's a difference between entertainment and news. And nobody is going to, I don't know, The Daily Show on Comedy Central or Jon Stewart or whatever for their news. They're going to be entertained, crack jokes at the news. People shouldn't be going to Rachel Maddow, Tucker Carlson, these people for news per se. They should be going to them. Okay, these are the stories, and here's somebody's opinion on those stories. And whether you like that or hate that, all well and good. You know what you're getting. You're getting somebody's opinion. These people are editorializing. They aren't just presenting facts, right? Meanwhile, as you said, if you want news, you go to a news anchor, and they're not going to be editorializing, hopefully. And if they are, then they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything you said.
Yeah. So unless, Stephen, you have any final questions, it's about time to wrap it up here. So I guess the first wrap-up question is the basic, if people are interested, want to learn more, want to talk to you more, where are some places they can find you, maybe reach out and ask some questions?
Listen, you can always reach out on my Twitter. My DMs are open.
Okay.
At Louis, at Sweet Lou. Louis is spelled right.
Like that?
right there. Don't worry, you don't have to spell the last name. It's not anyone. But I would say Twitter's probably the best way to do it. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. And then, Stephen, I'll kick down to you for the final question, which I'm sure we've asked Louis before, but we can ask him again.
We've almost certainly asked Louis this question, and I don't think it's fair because he's trained on this question.
That's okay. That's true.
And it's still a tough one.
It's always a tough one. It never gets easier. But as you know, again, 3 Jersey boys here. We've been in this game for a hot minute, and I'm curious. Maybe your answer's changed, since we've had some new experiences or whatever. Let's say it's 2 a.m. You just woke up. You're rolling into the newsroom. You get in the car. And you're like, it's a Jersey day today. I want to listen to a Jersey artist. You putting on Bruce Springsteen or Bon Jovi?
It's tough. I hate that.
And it's even tougher because he knows where the line sits on this one.
He knows how hard it is. Yeah.
I'll be honest. I forget which of you is on which side of the aisle.
Oh, wow.
Give me my 2 options one more time. This way I have 10 more seconds to think about it.
All right. Bruce Springsteen or Bon Jovi?
It's a tough one, but we're going to go with Bon Jovi.
There it is, Louis. He's got it. He knows. It's the Malillo, Biondolillo, it's the Illos.
It's the Illos.
It's the Illos. I know that.
The Illos. I just got the O.
It's the Illos, not the Olos.
But with that, thank you, Louis.
I can't believe that my last statement on this show is not the Illos, it's the Olos.
It's like Elio's Pizza almost, but not really.
Now we're just a bunch of Jersey Italian men making fun of our last names.
Yeah, well, you know what? At least we're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But with that, it was always, as always, it was a pleasure talking to you, Louis. It's always a great time whenever we get to hear Sweet Lou's sweet voice. Louis Biondolillo, the best producer in the industry, in my humble opinion. And I am so grateful to talk to you. See, that's 2 for 2. Louis, do you have any final thoughts, concerns, questions before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that anybody who's gotten this far into this conversation, well, thanks for listening. I didn't know it was that interesting. But two, turn on your local news. It might have been a while, whether that's on TV, whether that's on radio, because there is local radio, whether that's your local articles, whether that's even your local patch. There's nothing more local than your patch. Try it out. Give it a shot. If you don't like it, that's fine. Not for you. But if you like it, stay tuned. You might learn a lot more about your communities. And I'll tell you, ever since I started working at local news, I definitely learned more about the community.
Yeah, awesome. And community is important. Community is a big theme of the show. It's a big theme of Jersey First as an organization. So we knew it would be a great guest to have Louis on here at the Jersey First TV network. And for Jersey First and Bridging the Gap, I'm AJ Malillo.
I'm Stephen Rambola.
And we hope you have a wonderful week. And we will catch you next week for another episode of Bridging the Gap. Bye, everybody.